Good evening. If the people in the back could please take their seats, we would like to begin the hearing. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the Joint Committee on Education hearing. My name is Marty Walls, and I'm a state representative from the 8th Suffolk District, which includes Boston and Cambridge, and I am delighted to be here this evening. I am joined by my Senate co-chair, Rob O'Leary, from the Cape and the Islands District, as well as Representative Benson from Lunenburg. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. As you know, at this hearing, we are going to be listening to testimony on the Gloucester Community Arts Charter School approval process. There are a few housekeeping matters that I wanted to cover with you before we begin hearing testimony. First, the use of recording devices or photography is permitted under the rules of the hearing, provided there's no disruption with the conduct of the hearing. This means, among other things, that there will be no flash photography during the hearing. At this time, I'd like to remind you to turn off your cell phones or anything else you have with you that makes noise. That would be enormously helpful for us. We know there are strong feelings in the community about the charter school, and our purpose today is to address the approval process for this school. We will not be deciding whether the school is a good idea or a bad idea, and consequently, we ask that your remarks during the public testimony portion of the hearing be limited to the school's approval process. Further, we know that some in the community are concerned about the potential conflict of interest involving an employee of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, who is also a founding member of the school's board, a founding member of the school, excuse me. We do not intend to address that issue since any conflict of interest issues are within the purview of the State Ethics Commission. This is not meant by us to minimize the importance of that issue, but it is meant to recognize that there is another body that is the more appropriate place for any of those concerns to be addressed. So we will look to that agency for any guidance on any conflict of interest issues. The Education Committee has invited several people to testify, and we will hear from them first. Following their testimony, we will hear from members of the public who have requested to speak. We have some sign-in sheets up here already. If you are interested in speaking and have not signed up to do so, there is a table in the back, and we encourage you to sign in so that we will be able to recognize you when we reach that portion of the hearing. Under the rules of the committee, public testimony is limited to 3 minutes, and so please try to keep your remarks to that length of time. As we do when we have hearings at the State House, we will be using a timer. The gentleman to my left operates the clock, so when you hear the alarm go off, if you are still speaking at the 3-minute mark, we would ask that you wrap up your remarks at that point. We want to make sure everybody has a full and fair opportunity to be heard tonight, so we ask you to try to keep with that 3-minute limit. If any of you want to submit anything in writing, you can do so at the table to your left and to my right. After we finish here tonight, the Education Committee will determine what, if any, steps we want to take. We may also recommend that the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education take steps based on the testimony. Our purpose is to listen to your concerns and then, based on what we hear, decide if action is warranted. We don't have any required next steps or any specific timetable we must follow. We're here to listen and to determine how best to move forward in light of the testimony that we hear tonight. So thank you very much for being here, and I'd like to begin by recognizing Representative Ann Margaret Ferrante, who will be our first speaker this evening.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Chairman, for coming out here, and members, through you to members of the committee. I want to thank you for taking the concerns that we raised seriously, and seriously enough to come up here on a beautiful Monday evening to listen to our concerns. I also want to thank all of those who have been involved in this process, no matter which side they've been on, pro, con, which side they've been on. I want to thank them for their interest in education and their dedication to making sure that each child in Gloucester has the best opportunity for the best education. I had requested this hearing after becoming involved in a review process shortly after being sworn in. I came into the process midway through. And as I began to review and investigate irregularities that my constituents were making me aware of, it became clearer and clearer that the application was less about process and more about some sort of unwritten policy of advancing at least one charter school proposal to satisfy the statewide charter community. Now let me begin by bringing up these irregularities, and as I take you through them step by step, you'll see where I'm coming from. First is the hearing on December 11th of 2008. Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 71, Section 89, and the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, Section 605, paragraphs 1.04, subsection 3, subsection B, states that a board member shall be present at the hearing. Now, you know as well as I do that we try to make as many committee hearings as we possibly can because oftentimes we see a piece of legislation. We have a gut feeling towards that legislation, but it's in the public testimony that we're able to take in information and to actually get a feel for what that legislation represents. And we can understand why the legislature, both in regulation and in legislation, would have mandated that one board member be present. But on December 11th, there was no board member present. One of the criteria that must be evaluated is the support for the application. And had somebody been here from the board, they may have gotten a greater sense of that. Without that, all that they see is that there are 16 letters of support, 17 speakers in support. When it came to opposition, it was 151 opposition letters, 94 speakers scheduled to speak in opposition. And I'm not sure how paper alone gives you that impression without being at the hearing to hear the testimony of the community members and, most importantly, the elected officials and the parents. Instead of having a board member present, the board voted at its subsequent meeting to waive the regulation. Now, we all know that waiving a regulation doesn't seem possible. And further review of the regulations would lead you to believe that there is no provision that specially allows you to waive the regulation. Instead, what the board did, and I'm going to pass this out if I have your permission, Madam Chairwoman, to members of the board, is there's an email that says, that asks the questions of, and if we can't get anyone to come to the hearing, what shall we do? And it says, then we'll have to let the people know that they can complain to the board if they're upset by the absence. So not only are we complaining to the board, but we're taking this opportunity to complain to you as well. The second area of concern is the issue of 30,000 residents. And how do we count 30,000 residents? The 2000 census says that we have just over 30,200 residents here in Gloucester. One of the issues that was raised by constituents to me is how do we know that in 2009 that number still holds? And if that number doesn't hold, then is it fair to look back on a number that's almost 9 years old? And that in less than 1 year, when the charter school potentially would open, would that new census information, if it's under 30,000, make a difference? That's one of the reasons why Senator Tarr and I repeatedly asked the board and the Department of Education to hold off on a 1-year moratorium so that we could flush these issues out and so that they could become clearer. Also, there are questions raised as to the material changes in the application. From what I'm told, there was a number of supporting institutions that withdrew support before the time of the vote. But the question is, was that information taken into account, or was there some sort of cutoff period? Another issue raised is whether or not there are in actuality 400 signatures in support. And the commissioner, the day before the vote, even asked the question in an email of which I have a copy here, are those 400 parents in support who wanted to enroll their children in the charter school? That information was never accepted from what I can see of the public record by the Board of Education or the Department of Education. So it's difficult to determine how there could have been a review of the public-wide support. In addition to that, there's the internal review, and there's a statement of need, again, that I would like to present to members of the committee.